And welcome back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn Podcast. I am your host, Michael Grace, and today I am joined by Marcel Daane. Marcel is the recipient of the 2012 Global HR Excellence Award in Leadership, the 2016 Global Coaching Leadership Award, voted 2020 Executive Coach of the Year in Singapore. Marcel is an accredited professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. Some of you know that as the ICF. Since 2010, Marcel has been partnering with organizations, teams, and individuals in Asia and North America, providing leadership assessments, feedback, and coaching to align the leadership skills of senior managers and behaviors of teams with the organization's brand promise and culture. As a coach and author, Marcel is considered one of the world's authorities in mind and body leadership, a whole person approach to leadership, which we're going to talk about using a combination of energy practices, mindfulness, somatic awareness that enables leaders to choose the right energy projection for lasting results in how they perform, live, and lead. He is the author of critically acclaimed leadership and performance books, Headstrong Performance, and 5 Energies of Horrible Bosses and How Not to Become One, which you see on the screen. If you're watching the video, we learned a very cool trick using a technology called eCam. So, Marcel, welcome to the podcast.
That's pretty much everything that you really need to know about me. Of course, I am 55 years old, so a couple of things have happened in my life. But generally speaking, the one thing that I always say kind of sets me apart, which makes me a little bit unique, is the fact that I grew up in political exile, and meaning that I didn't get to grow up in kind of my home country. My mom was a political activist, and she was a political activist in South Africa, and she's actually one of 3 white women who was jailed for her political activities. And of course, being white South African was she was a big disappointment to the country. So they kicked her out. And so I kind of, grew up without a country, really. And we ended up, I spent my first 7 years in New Zealand. After that, we moved to the Netherlands, where I had my Dutch citizenship and all of that kind of stuff. And what's really interesting about growing up in political exile is I always had this bigger understanding that the world is there's a lot more to the world, right? Than what normal kids grow up with regularly. And I saw a lot of darkness in the world, with regards to, the horrors that that we can see in the world with regards to human rights and all of these kind of things. And as a child, that really affected me. And the unfortunate side effect of that was that as a teenager, I developed clinical depression and anxiety because of just because of this doom and gloom idea, right, of this ugly world that I was seeing. And it took many years for me to really kind of understand how to operate within that. And one of the downsides was, of course, is that my brain just operated in such a different way, with the mental illness and the experiences that I had, that it was very difficult for me to fit into society, to find a regular job and to do all of those kind of things was really, really challenging for me. Even just finishing school was a challenge for me. And it wasn't until many years later that I learned that, not being normal also meant that I have opportunity to be exceptional and to be unique. And that happened through the catalyst for that was actually a karate teacher that I had. He was, I met him in the 1980s, and he was an energy healer while he was also a martial arts teacher. And he kind of took me under his wing, and he taught me a lot about energy practices and how, when I started to learn to work with my own energy, how that actually changed how I felt about myself, and it changed my mental illness. I actually learned how to manage my own mental illness through understanding my energy, and that triggered for me this whole new direction that I wanted to go in my life. I ended up going back to school, and I completed a degree in undergraduate degree in complementary medicine, specializing in this space. And then after that, completed a master's degree in neuroscience. Because I was so fascinated with the human brain, especially my own, and really wanted to understand how screwed up I was, and so started studying neuroscience and finishing the master's degree. Funny enough, though, is in that process, that's actually where I became fascinated with leadership, and I ended up studying the brains of leaders, and how their brains operate in so many of these different situations, and the amount of pressure that they're under and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's what drove me into executive coaching, which I started shortly after, and from there I ended up writing 2 books, which is the first book is Headstrong Performance, which is basically about how do you keep your brain functioning optimally, right? No matter what kind of chaos you might be living in your life, how can you protect your brain? And that was, of course, that's a very important conversation, especially in today's day and age. And then the second book was the 5 energies of horrible bosses, which is really around our understanding of energy projection and how kind of everything that we deal with in organizations and teams and even family units, it all comes down to an interplay of energy and how we respond to each other's energy. And the first line of my book is in 5 energies of horrible bosses is the differentiating factor between a great boss and a not so great boss is simply how they project energy onto their people. And every other issue starts from that. And so what I did in this book is I propose a framework in which how we can understand our energy projection, but not only that, but also how we can consciously shift our energy projection, creating different results in different situations simply by shifting how we're actually projecting energy onto each other. And finally, that I even offer a framework around helping other people shift their energy as well, which is so important in leadership when we're negotiating and communicating and all of these kind of things. So that's the for me, that was a culmination of the being part neuroscientist but also part spiritualist, and having these influences that I had from my martial arts teachers, and being able to blend those together to create kind of a middle space, right, where we're really kind of leveraging on the science of things, but also on some of that spirituality and on our intuition and gut feelings and all of those kind of things. And how do you blend those together to create the best experience that you can in your life? And that's a place where I like to play, right? And so that's kind of where the book comes from. Yeah. So that's really is about me. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so often as leaders, we're so self-absorbed with tasks, right? The tasks of being a leader and managing people, and in managing, I hate that word, right? People are like, you're my manager, you're my boss. And I just react to that so negatively, right?
For sure.
But I think we get into this self-absorbed space, and we think we're being a great leader because we're doing the tasks, right? And I just listening to what you said about the energy, I feel like we're not consciously aware of that, right? We don't realize that is a very big component in how you present yourself in that way to your teams or to other teams. Is it's so obvious once you say it, but like until you hear somebody say it and talk about it, you're like, oh, yeah, I never thought about how my energy was coming across.
Well, yeah, and let's face it. I mean, let's be honest. Like, what school teaches it, right? So I mean, you can't really blame anybody really. I mean, you can't Harvard MBAs don't teach about energy projection, right? So there's at the end of the day, leaders are taught with a certain way of educating, right? And a lot of businesses today, and I write this in my book as well, is that from my experience, a lot of businesses are run on what I call the three pillars of wisdom, and they only use one of those pillars, and the three pillars are knowing, feeling, and sensing. And the knowing space is where a lot of people have a tendency to get stuck. Businesses are built on what they think they know, and the insatiable appetite for data, right, within organizations comes from this desire to know, because the more we know, the more we can strategize. And we hear that so often, right? Is we need to know these things before we can actually make decisions. And so companies, spend so much time and so much energy operating in this knowing space, but through that overvaluation of just that one pillar, a lot of organizations have also forgotten that there are these two other pillars that are equally valuable. I'm not downplaying the need for, we need to know a certain amount of data about, customer experiences and all of these kind of things. But at the end of the day, there is also the feeling space, the understanding emotional intelligence, for example, how we're connecting with each other, right? And then of course the sensing space. The sensing space is kind of understanding intuition and understanding how just these things can just come to us, these ideas and thoughts, how and allowing ourselves to be in a state of receptiveness from time to time to allow these things to come to us, right? And I remember having a conversation with the CEO of an IT company, a global IT company. He says, Marcel, I hear you, I totally get it, but I can't go to my board of directors and say, hey, listen, I want to make this, I want to do this $50 million initiative, and it's all based on a hunch. Right. And I totally get that. Right. And so where I propose that, companies can operate in this space is still value that knowing pillar, but we don't necessarily need to prioritize it per se. And if you look at all of the kind of big entrepreneurs that are around, whether it's the Elon Musks and and all of these kind of people, they have a tendency to use all three of these pillars, but they use it in a different kind of a different order, right? So most companies run on the knowing pillar first, then they run on maybe the feeling pillar somewhat, and then if there's any space left over, they might use that sensing pillar to kind of say, hey, what, is this really making sense to me? This, you putting all this data together. But these visionary entrepreneurs, they're the other way around. They operate more in that sensing space where inspiration hits them. They don't know where it comes from. They don't know what's happening, but it's there. And from there, that creates a feeling with them. That ignites a fire of passion, of things that go, oh my God, this is the idea for me. And they can't let that go for some reason. That from that feeling perspective, there's just something they can't let go. And then what they do is they hire really good people who help them put the data stuff together from that knowing pillar to say, is this plausible? Can I do something with this idea? Can this make money for us? And that's ultimately how great organizations are conceptualized, right? And great ideas, great products are all conceptualized from the sensing, feeling, and knowing pillars in that order, rather than the other way around. And so where a lot of companies, especially existing companies, struggle is in that priority of like, they're so stuck in that, hey, I need to operate in that knowing pillar. And then, oh yeah, there's, there might be some feeling and some sensing, but there's not a lot of value placed onto that. And I think if a lot of existing organizations spent more time, energy, and money investing in expanding those three pillars, you would always see an exponential growth in every facet of the organization. Yeah, for sure.
I love it. We talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and when we talk about how did you get your idea, it isn't like they're out there doing a bunch of data research, right? They didn't go out and like start analyzing all this data and go, okay, I see a niche here. It very much is, to your point, that sensing, right? They're like, ooh, this I feel this, I believe, and you can always sense their passion for what they're doing, right? Their energy is, I believe, I'm all in. They project themselves into and through whatever they're doing or whatever product they're doing, and they truly believe that it's bringing value to the marketplace, whether it's a service or a product. So
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
it.
And to me, that's also the big difference between leadership and management. I believe that managers are trained, right, to live in that knowing,
Mm-hmm.
feeling, and sensing, kind of in that priority. But leaders, on the other hand, they need to bring a greater amount of wisdom to the table. It's not just about what they know. Anybody can learn anything. Knowing stuff is just a process, right? We don't need any exceptional abilities to just know things. But on the other hand, having that wisdom, right, that comes from that feeling and that sensing, those sensing pillars, based on the
Mm-hmm.
experiences that we've had in our lives, they bring so much value to an organization as a leader. And so for any leader to kind of negate, right, or even organization to negate the value of those two other pillars, basically are tremendous inhibitory factors. And I would go out onto a limb to say, when COVID hit, for example, right, a year and a half ago, there were companies that within, kind of, it almost felt like within 5 minutes, we're able to just turn things around and
Yeah.
thrive in that circumstance. And then there were these companies that just really struggled, right? And some of them didn't
Yeah.
even kind of recover from that. And if you look at that, a lot of those companies that were able to come around in a heartbeat were those that were more accessible in that feeling and that sensing space. And they used what I like to call an interaction quotient. Basically, the higher the interaction quotient is of an organization, the quicker the turnaround can be of conceptualized ideas and thoughts and all of that kind of stuff. And what interaction quotient really is just high quality interactions in the least amount of time. And that ultimately is determined by the culture of the organization, right? And if you think about it, an organization is really nothing larger than the sum of its people. And what I say is that the culture of an organization is nothing more than the sum of the energies that are shared amongst the people. And that interaction quotient is a way of measuring those interactions and the quality of those interactions and the energies that are shared within those interactions. And companies that are just kind of really kind of live more in that feeling and sensing space, they have a tendency to
Mm-hmm.
have higher quality interactions than companies that just simply live in that kind of knowing space and really just that's where they want to live, and that's where they believe that that's all they need to be able to operate. And that was for me kind of a big eye opener when COVID hit. It was so obvious to me.
I love it. I think I wrote a blog post called "Innovation Unleashed," and it was talking about the speed of innovation in healthcare, which had traditionally been just such a stagnant industry, right?
Yeah.
And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, it was just like floodgates opened,
Mm-hmm.
and we just had this massive innovation boom to combat COVID, to deal with testing, to deal with the vaccine, and it continues, to this day
That's right.
in that space with some regulations taken off,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just been great. It's been great to watch.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and especially the healthcare, because of course with my undergrad in comp med, I had some experience in the healthcare industry, and the healthcare industry, because it's such a and understandably it's such a strongly regulated industry,
Mhm.
that it becomes heavily data oriented, right? Because everything has to be recorded,
Mm.
and and the unfortunate thing about it though is that it in many ways, yes, we can come up with vaccines and we can come up with all of these kinds of, but it also inhibits some innovations in terms of the ability to, for example, innovate the idea of the power, for example, of meditation and what effect meditation could have on a virus, right? And what kind of space, what certain things can we maybe discover in that space, and so there are still a lot of potential innovations out there, that I believe the healthcare industry is now going to become a little bit more open to, because they've experienced this boom
Right.
of innovation and this inspiration, right, that happens from this, that now we can expand it even further out and kind of say, hey, what else is out there, right, that's possible for us, that we can potentially leverage on, that we've to date never really explored, because we were always so restricted by living in that knowing pillar and never allowed ourselves to explore beyond that space. Yeah, for sure.
I love it. Um, Talking a little bit about the five energies of horrible bosses, just because I think that's just such a great title, right? When you get the honor to lead teams, you are always like, am I giving the team what they need, right? Am I
Mm-hmm.
inspiring enough? Am
Mm-hmm.
I, and you're always, at least I think good leaders are always, introspecting and going, how can I be better? How can I give
Mm-hmm.
more to my team to make them better? So kind of what are kind of the five energies, just so I make sure I don't have any of
So here's the short answer to this, and the only reason why I frame it that way is because I was a horrible boss myself once, and
them?
I believe that every great leader can recognize in themselves a time in their life where they too were a horrible boss.
Mm,
The A big red flag for me, right, is a leader who says, "No, I've always been a great boss." That it could potentially be a sign of a lack of self awareness, right?
right.
And every single leader out there had at some point in time an experience where they were a horrible boss, whether they were aware of it or not. And what the five energies comes down to is that we all project. We have a default way of projecting energy, and it's been created from kind of a lifetime of experiences and kind of our way of operating. And what these five energies are, they you want to think of the way that I talk about it in the book, is you want to think of a compass, right, kind of north, south, east,
Mm,
and west. And this is kind of how these energies
sure.
flow. And this comes from the understanding of qi, for example, in Chinese traditional medicine, but also in prana and in Ayurvedic medicine. And if you put these two frameworks together, it's quite interesting. You have an east and west kind of flow of energy, which is the chi, and then you have in prana, like the chakras, it's kind of a north and south type energy. And interestingly, the names are kind of a great depiction of kind of what that energy does. So in the east and west axis, the forward moving energy is known as determined energy. So that's just simply
Mm,
kind of that forward moving. That's in a space when I need to get something done, and I need to I need to be task oriented, for example, or I need to convince a person to kind of buy into what I'm trying to do. I need a certain amount of determined energy to be able to drive that initiative forward, and that's a great thing to have. And each energy, by the way, all five energies serve us in some way or another, but they also sometimes don't
right.
serve us, and that's the important thing. And so if I'm always in
Mm,
that forward moving space, there are also going to be times, like you mentioned, where it's going to be more important for us to be maybe more a little bit more retrospective, or it could be that we need to be asking people for feedback. We need to be asking people for opinions and and kind of their ideas and all
right.
of these kind of things. And that's the opposite energy, and that's what I call inviting energy. So inviting energy is the ability to take in energy and kind of say, hey, what's actually happening here, and do I have do I give myself space to be more inviting in my energy. Inviting energy is also allows us to also be more empathetic. It allows us to kind of be more open to what other people have to say, what their thinking is. Now, in the northwest axis, there is at the top of the north side there is light energy, and at the bottom there is heavy energy. And lightness is of course a joyfulness, is being carefree, is being spontaneous, is having a good time, right? It's like if you've ever gone to a party and you're having a really good time and you have a tendency to want to dance and stuff like that, you're in light energy. That's basically what light energy feels like. And the opposite end of that is heavy energy. And heavy energy is kind of like where we're serious and where we're more focused on things like safety and doing the right thing, and kind of core
Right.
values, and integrity, and all of those kind of uh, energies, right, all live in that heavy space. It's where we are grounded into the ground, and we are kind of, our feet are like roots. And if you look at a person, for example, who lives in heavy energy, the way they walk is very different than a person who lives in light energy. We can see
Mm.
simply on body language and behavior whether somebody is in light energy or heavy energy. So that's where the mind body element comes into, and I call that framework the MBA, which is the best education you're ever going to get as an MBA, which stands for mind, body, and action. Is understanding what's
Mm.
happening in your mind, understanding the thought processes, the emotions, the feelings, and all of that kind of stuff, understanding how your body is embodying what's going on in your mind. How is that showing up for you? And then understanding the actions that you might be, or inactions that you might be taking based on kind of what you're thinking and what you're feeling and how your body is behaving. And so each of these energies shows up in a different way. And so the fifth energy, of course, is neutral energy, and neutral energy sits right in the middle of the axis. We're not north, we're not south, we're not east or west. We are strictly in the middle, and that is of course, what we talk about mindfulness, about being balanced, being centered. All of that kind of stuff is more in that neutral space. So we all have this flow of energy, and we'll all experience in ourselves times in a day where we might be determined, we might be heavy, we might be light,
Mhm.
we might be inviting, all of those kind of things. But most of us have what we call a default energy. That's kind of the place where we are most practiced. We spend most of our time there because we've gotten the most results for ourselves in that space. So if I'm, for example, the kind of leader, as you mentioned earlier, for example, being task oriented, that would either be in a determined energy or in a heavy energy. And so if I'm, let's say, in a very determined space and I'm always moving forward, right, and I'm never taking time to listen to other people's perspectives and ideas and take those things in, that could potentially alienate me a little bit to those people who want to be heard and who want to kind of share and want to provide their insights and all of those kind of things. And it may even appear very assertive and sometimes even aggressive to a person who lives in light energy. Somebody who lives in light
Mhm.
energy can feel very intimidated by somebody who's kind of projecting a lot of determined energy. And so, as a boss, you might be saying, "Hey, listen, I'm a great boss. I get a ton of stuff done. My team is working. They're hitting their KPIs and they're hitting the numbers. I'm a great boss." And yet, everybody around them is kind of like feeling like they're walking on eggshells, and they're feeling frustrated because they can't share their opinions and things like that. And in their opinion, yeah, maybe this is not such a great boss as this boss might think of themselves, right? And so for any leader or any boss really is having the understanding of what kind of energy am I projecting at this moment in time, and is this the type of energy that is serving the situation and is serving me and is serving my people in the best way possible. Now, if it is, great, stick with it. But if it isn't, change it, right? Shift that energy. And that's where the practice comes in, is having that awareness that we can be in any energy we want, and that we can challenge any challenge or problem or anything like that in any of the energies. We don't have to be in a specific energy. We can choose to be in any one of them. And sometimes simply by shifting our energy, we create new insights, we create new ideas, new different ways of operating that can create so much clarity for us simply by creating a shift within our own bodies.
I love it. Just listening to you go through that, I was like, oh my gosh, that explains this person. That
Mm-hmm.
explains, like, oh, I get it, right? Like, I think so many people, right, lead in that determined and heavy energy,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes I'm more in, I think, that light or inviting energy,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm like, wow, that person's this, right, and I cast an opinion on them, and I'm like, oh, that makes total sense, right? I'm
Uh-huh.
just in a different space,
That's
right?
right.
And I could move into that other space and kind of align with them and use that to my advantage in having a better relationship
That's right.
with that person, and maybe help them, move out of that space into more of a light or
Exactly.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, it just makes so much sense when you say. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is the key, right? This
Uh,
you just unlock the key to the universe, and it's
Well,
awesome.
it's so simple, right? And this again, this is kind of how my because my brain works differently, right? And so when over the years when I've been working with leaders, I mean, there are a lot of psychometric tests and all of these kind of the MBTI's and the
Yeah,
discs, and they're all wonderful tools, and they create great insights, but they don't offer people an opportunity to change. They don't say to people, hey, listen, so if you don't want to be an INFJ anymore, change it, right? It's like, no, this is what you are, and this is kind of what you're stuck with, right? And the interesting thing in
mm,
Asian health practices, that doesn't exist. We don't have that same fixation. And what we know about neuroscience, and especially with regards to neuroplasticity, right, the ability of the brain to change itself, is that none of this stuff is fixed. We're not. It's not a life sentence that we have, some profile
right.
over another. And so that was always kind of, for me, it's like, hey, why don't we have a model where we can just choose? We can just say, hey, right now I'm gonna move myself more into light energy because that's serving me better, rather than kind of being the one or the other. So that's kind of
I
what
love
what
it.
inspired me to create that. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's it just sounds like a great book that folks should go read, and add it to kind of the repertoire we're all as leaders trying to be better. And to me,
Sure.
this is maybe not the tactical side, right? It's more the introspective self side that I think sometimes we ignore.
Yeah,
If,
absolutely. And the other thing too is that if you're keen, right? If you want to know what your default energy is, it's really simple. Just go to my website, marceldaane.com. I have a free assessment on it, and you can do the assessment. It takes about 5 minutes, and that assessment will tell you what your default energy is.
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Knowledge is power, right? Because once you know where you are, then you can learn and
You can
grow
learn to
to
shift it.
to
That's
to
right.
flex.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's awesome.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And I'm learning so much. So you've had an opportunity to coach leaders
Hmm.
of large multinational companies and such. If if you could coach any leader today, who would that be, and why?
Oh, I love that question. Somebody asked me that question a little while ago, and I laughed. And the answer then, and the answer is the same. Would actually be Joe Biden. I would love to coach Joe Biden. I would also have loved to have had an opportunity to coach Donald Trump. But unfortunately, I always doubted whether or not he was coachable, because you can only coach somebody that wants to be coached, right? Uh, you know, but I wonder, what I've always wondered, what Donald Trump was, kind of his default energy projection would be, because he's a little all over the place, and fascinates the hell out of me. So I would have loved to have been able to do some work with him, just from an academic standpoint. And I'm sure there are plenty of other people,
Sure.
but Joe Biden is another one that I would love to be able to work with. I really believe that for me anyway, the energy that I see Joe Biden kind of live in is inviting energy. Right, he lives very much in that space of taking in perspectives and ideas, and all of that kind of stuff. But I think an area where he kind of struggles a little bit is in applying determined energy, right? Is being able to put his foot down,
I'd
and
agree.
and to be able to kind of say, hey guys, this is what it's going to be. And that, for him, I think that shift of energy would really help him a lot in that space. And so yeah, it doesn't matter if you're the president of a country, or you're president of an organization, or simply just a manager growing. We all need practice in this energy. We all have a default energy that is our strength, but usually that also means that we have at least one or two that really needs some serious flexing in some situations. And when we
Hmm.
flex those we're able to get more done.
Right. I love it. I love those two choices. Those are two great people that would probably be extremely challenging for different reasons.
Different reasons.
Probably,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
to be a coach with. Well, Marcel, I know I've learned a lot. Hopefully, the listeners have too. Two cool books out there: Headstrong Performance and Five Energies of Horrible Bosses, and How Not to Become One, which is the key aspect, I think. And you've raised awareness and put a focus on an aspect of leadership that I think is probably underserved by the books and such. So I want to
Mhm.
thank you for taking the time, joining the podcast, putting up with our little technical behind the scenes. We had some technical glitches that hopefully, when I'm done with my amazing editing skills, are totally blinded and you
There we
won't have
go.
any idea. But Marcel was a true sport and hung out through that. So I want to thank you for taking the time. Marcel's available on his website. I'll have the link down below. Um, and again, thank you for doing the research and bringing it to the forefront, because I'm going to go take the test on the website,
Awesome.
do the instrument, because I think it's just so amazing to it's so simple, but you're just unaware until someone like yourself brings it up and brings it to the forefront and gives us yet another tool to be better leaders. So I honestly appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, you're most welcome, and I look forward to hearing from you what your default energy is, and I'm sure you're pretty much in the mark, because that's what I love about this. It is, in many ways, it is very kind of intuitive, right? And we very often, when we just kind of have a think about it, we often kind of say, hey, this is kind of where I'm at the energy, and that's actually one thing that, of course, I'm biased, but that's one thing I really love about the model, is that it is so simple. You can learn this in 5 minutes. It doesn't take months and years to be able to do. It's because we all project energy. We're already doing it, right? It's just a matter of being aware of it and then being able to kind of figure out how to shift it.
I love it. All right, sir. Thank you.